Hey, Herta here, and today we'll be talking about my shop's light cones. Aeon, Stellar Seed, Texture, Solitary Healing, and now the brand new Calculus. We'll first talk about Calculus, not the math subject, don't worry, and how it compares to current Air Edition options. After that, we will then be going over the old cones and how strong they are looking back at them, and I guess the priority for new players on which to pick up. I do think having 8 to 16 Herta bonds at the start of a new version number like 2.0 or 3.0 is a good strategy, so you can look to get the brand new cone if they are waiting a year for a new one. Anyways, like and sub if this video helps, and let's begin. Eternal Calculus is a 5-star Air Edition cone. It has a decent base attack of 529 for our lovely DPS. As for the passive, it will first give a permanent 12% attack at Superimposition 5. And then after an attack, for every enemy you hit, you'll get an additional 8% attack up to 5 stacks. It will last until the next attack. Additionally, if you hit 3 or more, you now get a 16% speed buff. So totaling the buffs, you have a possible 52% attack buff and a 16% speed buff. With its decent base attack, this is pretty nice. It is obviously designed for pure fiction though, and is very weak outside of it, and maybe some high enemy count based events. Before comparing though, let's look at how it works in-game. As we can see, the 12% attack buff is present at all times, which it should be. But when attacking, we also receive no buff of attack percent on our very first swing. This is due to the way it's designed, where it works after an attack. So instead of the buff being applied to the attack itself, which happens most of the time on light cones worded with when the wearer uses an attack, it is applied afterwards. This means your next attack will be buffed by how many targets your previous attack hit, and keep repeating that way. Which also means you can replace a high attack buff with a small one if something unlucky happens. For example, you hurt a skill into 5 enemies. Your next attack gets a 5-stack buff. Your Himiko ult wipes 4 out of those 5, and now Herta spins and only gains a 1-stack attack buff, while simultaneously wasting the 5-stack buff. This is quite niche, but you won't always have 5 enemies on the field. Speed buff won't be replaced if you hit less than 3 enemies after already activating it, which also makes sense, since it's only the attack buff that disappears and reappears during attacks. However, again, since the speed buff can also just not be activated in some niche cases, this also makes for an annoying to use light cone. Finally, remember one half of Pure Fiction has 4 enemies max, and one has 5. Having your Air Edition be needed on the 4 enemy side means for a weaker cone. The only other cone that has this stipulation would be Himiko. So every Air Edition can use this cone in Pure Fiction. So every Air Edition except Qingshui, because she's a destruction unit hiding in the Air Edition path. It is a very generic cone with a large stat boost. However, the speed at least is versatile in that it can boost break-based Air Edition units too, or at least break Air Edition builds. This is also seen, for example, for Hunt Break DPS using adversarial speed buff. In fact, this is our first Air Edition cone suited for break DPS outside of Passkey, but I prefer Passkey. You could also end up using attack percent boots and use the passive speed buff to ensure breakpoints. My 2 problems with that though is that the first turn won't get the speed buff, so you'd have to compensate a bit in speed. And again, if you ever miss up and have to hit less than 3 enemies, your breakpoint will also mess up. As for the strength itself, it does in fact give a very slightly stronger attack buff than Himiko in S1, but it's an incredibly negligible difference. The lower base attack is saved by the higher attack percent, but it really isn't anything to write home about. Comparing the 2 next buffs, and you have no more competition. The speed buff can maybe inch out a final attack in Pure Fiction if you build correctly, but the permanent 30% damage buff from Himiko is much more powerful and worth more than an extra action here. Versus 4-star cones, luckily they do have a lower base attack, so they can't just beat this cone directly. Eternal Calculus looks to be better than both 4-star Forgotten Hall cones, but not by far if you don't consider the speed buff as a whole extra action. And unless you've got a Sparkle or something crazy for the crit damage saturation, Genius's Repose will be beating Calculus. For Peaceful Day, unless you're rocking Serval's 100 energy and or lack a ton of attack percent, this cone won't be beating that either. So whilst it is made for Pure Fiction, if you're already rocking a Genius's Repose, Himiko, Peaceful Day, etc., I wouldn't bother picking this up. Remember though, there are other cones to pick up, and Herta bonds are quite long to gather up. So let's go look at the other options. On the Fall of an Aeon, our Destruction Herta Shop cone is what Eternal Calculus wishes it was. The same base attack, but a 12% higher attack buff at the cost of a small ramp-up time. This ramp-up time is especially negligible on a unit like Firefly or Jingliu, who have self-advance. For Shui and Clara, they can get extra actions with their follow-up attacks anyway. For the second part, instead of a speed buff, we get pure damage, with a 2-turn 24% damage buff upon breaking a weakness. On the fall of an Aeon, it is contested by every destruction unit not named Blade. On all of them, it is among the top 3 cones, as it just brings pure universal power, unlike limited cones that have a lot of annoying niche qualities to them. Sure, the crit damage of Jingliu's cone is nice, but good luck abusing the rest of the passive on anyone else. Lunay's cone is powerful, but not everyone uses basic attacks, you silly goose. If you want to use the destruction DPS, I highly recommend getting this cone as your very first choice. It's especially important when considering that the 3 4-star cone options are quite rough. With walk time, it is pretty unusable on most of them, and weak if you do manage to fulfill it. Flames of Fire is a blade only cone. Definitely pick Aeon up if you just pulled Firefly as a new player, for example, and ignore those standard pulls until Honkai Star Rail 2 comes out. Texture of Memories is our preservation cone. It gives a small effect res boost, and it also gives a very durable but HP scaling shield when the wearer is attacked and doesn't have a shield. The base HP is decent, but among 5-star options, the base defense is only stronger than Fu Xuan's signature. This cone is a decent option for Fu Xuan as it makes herself very tanky. It, however, doesn't help with your team tankiness, so something like Day 1 of My New Life would help more with that. So for the pretty much sole user of this cone, it's not Aeon tier, it's pretty replaceable. For every other preservation unit, other options are much better. Everyone not named Fire MC shields themselves very well already, and even if they couldn't, having a shield for themselves is not really relevant. Fire MC technically can want to tank everything with their taunts so no one else gets hit, but a death percent scaling cone would be stronger, and they only see use on aggro teams with Trend anyway. As for the rest, March's shields warp aggro a lot. Aventurine wants to shield the whole team and make sure no one gets hurt. Japad wants to too, and he does end up tanking a lot of hits with his self-inflicted aggro buff, but AoE attacks would make Texture Memories fumble, whereas a death percent cone would ensure tankier shields. I think Texture is the worst or tied worst cone in the Herta Shop. It only becomes somewhat relevant if you're pulling Fu Xuan. Solitary Healing was the first new addition to the Herta Cone shop all the way back in version 1.3. If I were a betting bear, I'd save Herta Bonds for version 3.3, where we will hopefully get an Abundance Herta Cone with Cleanse. Anyways, we first get a 40% break effect buff. This used to be pretty irrelevant, but now has some value thanks to Super Break. Let's not get too excited though, because outside of break dodge units, this cone is just an 8% break effect boost over S5 for Martyr, a free Forgotten Hall cone. Secondly, when you use your ultimate, you get a 2-turn 48% damage buff to your dots and them alone. And due to how some buffs work, if you activate your ult on your turn, you'll get 3 actions worth of the buff. But if you activate it just before, you can lose out on a turn. However, since dots calculate their damage upon the enemy taking the damage or detonations, this can sometimes not matter. Either way, it doesn't boost kit damage or breaks or anything, but the dot buff is nice to have. Finally, you get 6 energy when an enemy with your damage over time effect dies. In MOC and Apocalyptic Shadow, this is pretty negligible, but in Pure Fiction, this cone was reborn. You get 5 energy a kill in Pure Fiction, and 6 energy on top means 11 total, which is slightly above a kill in other modes. Considering you get 4 to 5 enemies on the field and a whole backlog of enemies waiting to sacrifice themselves, this cone gets you so many additional ultimates, which means a permanent dot damage buff too. So this cone, if you don't care about dot at all, is useless. For breakdown hit units, that many Herta Bonds is a complete waste over just using for Martyr. If you use a break build dot unit though, this can be great on them to combine all of the effects. And finally, if you use a dot unit in Pure Fiction, this cone can see some explosive results. And finally, Stellar Sea is like Aeon, but if you care about hunt units. 16% permanent crit rate and an additional 16% on attacks versus half health or under enemies. When defeating an enemy, a 40% attack buff. In early days, these seemed too conditional, but let's be real. If you're a hunt unit and not killing an enemy every 2 turns, what are you doing? The only times you can't are specific boss fights with no add summons like Aventurine, but everywhere else, you're balling. The cone also has a nice base attack as always, and there isn't much else to say. If you want to invest into hunt DPS, this is the one to prioritize. The only instance I'd say not to is if you want to invest into a break build or a break hunt unit like Boot Hill. What's really nice about Stellar Sea is it doesn't discriminate about hit count. Swordplay, Sleep Like the Dead, and Final Victor are all abusable by Topaz, but enjoy trying to stack or proc their effects on Ratio's one-hit attacks. So no matter the hunt unit, as long as they're a crit hunt, this cone is top tier on them. For free-to-play hunt options, Final Victor is nice when you do have high hit counts, but rough otherwise, and River Flows is just weak. So just like Aeon, this cone is very valuable for starter players or people that hate the light cone banner. With all that being said, the best two cones in my opinion are Stellar Sea and Aeon, depending on which DPS path you plan to focus on. They both enable DPS in Apocalyptic Shadow and Memory of Chaos. However, if you're really struggling in Pure Fiction specifically, Eternal Calculus and Solitary Healing can be good too, and I would prioritize Solitary Healing out of the two if you do have a unit that can abuse it. As for Calculus, Breakfast and Cosmos exist, unlike Destruction and Hunt, which have mostly lackluster free-to-play options. Textual Memories is found dead in the ditch until another unit can abuse it, or if you want to run it on Fu Xuan. I hope that video helped, thanks to my amazing YouTube members, thanks for watching, and have a good day.